Hi, I'm Jonathan, and welcome to First Last Everything, a podcast where I chat with guests about their relationship with technology through their first love, last obsessions, and the piece of tech that meant everything to them. Each item a guest brings to the show could be anything from a piece of software to a computer to a weird gadget to that first camera. Pretty much anything goes. This time I'm joined by the Emmy-award-winning writer David X Cohen. David started writing on Beavis and Butthead in the early 90s before joining The Simpsons, where he was responsible for many well-known episodes like Lisa the Vegetarian and the Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie show. Then, in 1999, with Simpsons creator Matt Groening, David co-developed what happens to be my all-time favourite TV show, Futurama, which recently dropped its 13th season on Hulu and Disney+. But David's history is not just in television. He worked in the robotics lab while attending Harvard, studied theoretical computer science, and has a deep history with technology, all the way back to the early days of home computers. As you can expect, there was a lot for us to talk about. So, First Last Everything with David X Cohen. Let's go. David, thank you so much for taking the time out of your presumably very busy schedule producing the show to come on the podcast. It's been a while since we chatted verbally, so it's great to see you again.
Yes, likewise. Thank you for having me here on Zoom, the place where I spend all day, every day. Very comfortable here.
So this podcast is about our relationships with technology. So I wonder what you feel your relationship is like with technology. Do you think it's a healthy one?
Oh, no. It's very sickly. It's certainly not healthy. I suffer from phone addiction, as does everybody in the world, and I think it's super harmful and makes it hard for me to get stuff done, and I'm a big procrastinator anyway, so, I'm addicted, I love it, and it's wrecking my life at the same time.
Do you take any steps to try and wean yourself off or make you resist picking up the phone?
I try to take walks sometimes because it's just, hurts my eyes to try to look at the phone screen in the LA sun, although I'm still sometimes listening to stuff when I do that. The biggest distraction is work, and that's the thing that keeps me in contact with humans, is the fact that I have to spend long hours talking to people to write Futurama. So thank God I'm employed still, or I'd be a total zombie. There's good parts of technology too. I may have gotten off on the wrong foot for a technology-related podcast here. So, I'm making use of it in positive ways all the time as well. It's not purely ruining my life. It's also saving and making possible my life.
Good. That's good to hear. I mean, this is what it's all about. It's about finding out the good and the bad about our relationships with technology. So I want to go back to when you were very young. You were back in high school. You wrote the humor column for your high school paper. You were a member of your school's state maths team, I believe.
It was our regular math team, but we were the state champions of New Jersey. The state of New Jersey, when I was a senior, and boy, I'm really happy you brought that up. This is like you jumped straight to the high point in my life right away. But yeah, we were a public school, not a fancy school compared to some of the other elite private schools in our area, but we had a core of super nerds, and happened to be around the time I was there, and I proudly count myself among them. So yeah, we champions of New Jersey. High point of my life. It's all downhill for the rest of the interview.
I should have introduced you as a Emmy-award-winning writer and state maths champion.
Yeah, not in that order either.
Yeah, exactly. So as well as that, both your parents were biologists as well. So would I be right in saying that technology, like early computers and so forth, were forming quite a big part of your life back then?
You would be very correct in saying that. I will say particularly it was my dad who was very, in a childlike way, delighted by computers and games and stuff in an infectious way that I caught from him. And so he ran out and bought one of the first home Pong machines. And bought an Apple II computer when it was available. And even going back earlier than that, like I remember we used to, our family would be in this local uh, department store, all-purpose store of a type that doesn't exist that much anymore. And they had a little arcade section, which was, a few pinball machines. But then when I was a little kid, they started to have these very primitive video games. There was one where you tried to get a rocket to the top of the screen without getting hit by little pixel-sized asteroids that were flying back and forth. And, just these very, predating Space Invaders and that era. And I remember playing those with my dad, and in retrospect realizing, my dad, it wasn't like the kid sneaking away to the arcade to avoid the shopping trip. It was my dad, and I was the excuse to let him go to the arcade. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're jumping straight into your first pick, actually, with that mention there, because your pick for your first bit of tech that kind of inspired you is essentially arcade games. Is that correct?
I would absolutely say that's correct. These, like, when I saw those games on the screen as a little kid, it was absolutely a magical moment that brings me sort of a chill that I can still feel now. Wow. And I know people feel this feeling about different things from their childhood, Christmas presents or whatever. But for me, like, that magical tingling feeling is like I saw this stuff, colorful stuff happening on a screen, and it's like, I can't believe this magic thing exists. And of course, I was young enough that I didn't even think about how it worked or programming or anything. I was just thought like, oh yeah, someone built this thing. But I hit it at just the right time. And I went to arcades in the 80s and played a lot of those early games and spent all my quarters, and that was fun times for me.
Did you get really good at any of the games in particular?
Yeah, there were a few. You mentioned, because you've done your homework, that both my parents were biologists. My dad worked every summer at a marine biological laboratory in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, which is Cape Cod on the east coast of the U.S. And it's a little town, like kind of a quaint little town, but it's packed with scientists. So it's a very interesting, unusual crossroads of people. And there was a tiny little arcade on the side of a restaurant. And they would have like 2 pinball machines and 2 video games that would change each summer. So whatever they had, I would get pretty good at. So a couple of the early ones, Berserk, if people remember that, the robots in the maze, which we have made fairly frequent references to in Futurama, which had the voice going, get the humanoid, get the intruder alert, all that stuff. So it had very early talking in it. And there was a game there called Space Gorilla, GUE, Gorilla, which no one's ever heard of. And then in the slightly bigger arcade that I had to ride my bike to, games I got very good at, some well-known Battlezone, the vector graphics game Battlezone with the 3D tanks, and Quix, or people call it Kix. I always called it Quix, QIX, with a very abstract, beautiful game. That was my absolute favorite game. And one called Gorf. I don't know, I could go on a bit, but I don't know where I got all those quarters. Paper Route. I had a Paper Route. I guess that's where.
Oh, that's good. That would feed the habit. So then you went to Harvard and you got a BA in physics, but you also took classes on building computers, correct? What did you build?
Yeah, I would say, class in that case. But yeah, I kind of knew I was more interested in computer science than physics, but I've always had this character flaw where I feel like studying practical stuff is somehow morally a step down from studying theoretical stuff. And I much more enjoy practical stuff. Like I like hacking around on the computer. I like making games and stuff that's just active, and I always felt like, well, that's fun, so it's not what I'm supposed to do in school. And I kind of made that arguably mistake twice, both in undergraduate and graduate school, where I studied physics in graduate school, and then I went to graduate school and switched from studying AI to studying theoretical computer science. So both times sort of the same thing, where it's like I get so fascinated with the idea that I sort of forget that what I actually enjoy is sitting at the computer and making it bend to my will. But in undergraduate, I took this is in the earlier days of computer science, but we're talking about the late 80s here. I took an electronics class, and this was physics, famous Harvard class called Physics 1, 2, 3, where you study electronics. But the final project at that time, because it had kind of just become possible, was building a little computer with, you had to literally wire everything together, the microprocessor and the memory, and pretty intense.
Soldering and things like that as well?
There was not a lot of soldering. It was basically all built on a breadboard where you could plug stuff in and out of, just the built-in slots on there.
Right.
And even plug the chips in there. And then once you had the basic design built, which was very soothing, by the way, I have to say, if anyone, I mean, no one probably does this anymore, but a lot of the time I would be in there. It was a long lab class. You'd be in there for like 3 hours at a stretch or something. And a lot of the time was spent skinning the ends off of wires. And it was very Zen kind of thing where because you needed, just to transport a byte, you needed 8 wires, to go from one place to another. So it was just a lot of skinning the ends of wires and then plugging them into the breadboard and keep, just focusing carefully to make sure each wire was going to the right place and stuff.
Almost like whittling a stick.
Yes. Yeah, very much. And so, your mind can kind of wander a little bit, but not too. I actually found it very relaxing.
So once you graduated Harvard, you were doing, this is the robotics laboratory that you joined.
Yeah, I had been doing some work with a British professor named Alan Yule, a brilliant guy, who was doing some very early computer vision work at the Harvard robotics lab at that time.
He worked with Stephen Hawking, right? Is that?
He had gotten his PhD with Stephen Hawking as his advisor, is my understanding. So also a former physics person gone wrong and gone into the world of computer science and AI. But nice guy, very smart guy, and did some very early neural network learning work and relating to vision as well. So I graduated, and because I had been writing for the Harvard Lampoon, writing comedy, which was sort of, I considered just my hobby during college. But as I was graduating, suddenly realized that some people I knew were planning to try to make a career out of that, whereas I was planning to go study computer science. I suddenly had a total panic, and I was like, maybe I want to do that. And I just finally punted. I kicked the can, whatever the expression is that translates across the ocean. And I deferred my graduate school at UC Berkeley for a year to decide what I wanted to do, and I worked as a laboratory assistant for Professor Yule in the Harvard robotics lab. And I was basically a computer programmer, but I got to work on a bunch of these very early models where he had this idea about templates made of basic shapes like parabolas and circles and things that could represent facial features. So the eye particularly could be like a circle with a part of a parabola above it, part of a parabola below it.
Is this where you worked on that? I remember you telling me about you worked on some program that would identify the eye of Marilyn Monroe in a photo of Marilyn Monroe.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah, so yes, that's what I always used to tell. My program can find Marilyn Monroe's eye in a picture of Marilyn Monroe's eye. So yeah, we were going back a while, but it was based on these learning principles where it would slowly adjust based on the parameters of the picture and try to fit this template as best as it could to the picture and decide where the eye was, what the angle was, how open it was, that kind of stuff. Here's a interesting side note that also in the robotics library at that time was a graduate student named Ken Keeler, who went on to be one of the long-serving Futurama writers, still with us today from beginning to end, has written more episodes than anybody, a completely brilliant guy in all regards, mathematically, scientifically, writing, musician, just brilliant guy. Anyway, so he was working there at the time. And I wrote another program like the eye program that could look for mouths in pictures of mouths. And for that one, I was training it. I was using pictures of all the graduate students' faces. Right. And so there was a parabola which represented the center line of the mouth from left to right. And whether, depending on the curvature of that, I called it the smile coefficient. It would either be positive or negative. And Ken was the only student who had a negative smile coefficient. So I always thought that was amusing and accurate.
Yeah, I don't know if that's anything that he would be particularly pleased of at the time, would he?
You know, if you have a negative smiling coefficient, you're not going to be pleased by anything. But
Yeah, I
I
guess so.
still forced it on him for the humor value.
After you graduated from Berkeley with an MS in computer science, you then went and pursued writing. Your first TV credits were Beavis and Butthead. You did 3 episodes, I believe.
2, I think.
2, okay, in
Yep.
93, and then you joined The Simpsons also in 93. Bit of trivia, which you told me earlier on, that you moved into Conan O'Brien's office as he moved out.
Yes.
So you've written quite a few popular episodes of The Simpsons, including Lisa the Vegetarian and the Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie show, which is one of my favourites. But you also wrote one part of the Treehouse of Horror 6 called Homer Cubed, Homer 3, Homer Cubed, whichever you want to call it, in which Homer appears as a 3D animation and even interacts with a real life street, which is worth saying that Toy Story had actually just come out that summer. So this was a real kind of technological kind of breakthrough for a TV show to be doing this. What do you remember about that and writing that episode, and sort of any technical challenges that must have come around?
That is a very interesting episode to discuss because the perception of it is completely different watching it now than it would have been watching it in 1995 or whatever year that came out. So first of all, yes, these Pixar movies were coming out, and what did you know about them? Well, they cost $100 million to animate or whatever. So we don't have remotely that kind of budget to do anything. So TV shows weren't doing that kind of stuff. It wasn't in a TV budget. It was a big budget movie technology. We thought, well, we're doing these Halloween episodes. They're only 7 minutes long. Maybe we can do it for one episode. We actually got a company to volunteer their time as promotion to do the 3D graphics. But if you watch it now, there's stuff. For example, Homer just looks around and says, like, man, this place looks expensive. At the time, the joke of that was just, yes, because, no one is doing this for TV. If you see it now, you think the joke is, wow, it looks really cheap and crummy.
Yeah.
So the joke has completely changed in an unplanned manner. And we had to use many 3D models that they just had lying around already, a Greek temple or a pond of water, whatever. A lot of the things we used because that was what models were available, and it wasn't even easy. It was very expensive to even design new 3D models of stuff at that time. So they had to design the characters, but we wanted to, try to use stuff that they had. And then if I may really nerd out and get to the high point from my point of view, which was the joke about Fermat's last theorem. Is that acceptable material for this podcast?
Go for it, David.
Okay.
There'll be some listeners, I'm sure, who will be really excited to hear about this, I'm sure.
Well, this Fermat's last theorem, which was not proved at that time, but subsequently was over the course of years, it says that if you have the equation a to the n plus b to the n equals c to the n, and they're all integers, that if you make n anything greater than 2, that there's no possible solutions to that equation. So now I think my memories are hazy, but I think I had a brief discussion with a mathematician named Amy Wilkinson, who I knew about this as well. So a little credit to her as well, and came up with the idea that I would write some software. So here my hacking comes back into it again, to look for very, very close misses. Now, it's impossible for those numbers to add up, but at that time, almost all calculators people had, and people weren't using their computer as calculators, so they had hand calculators, had 8 decimal points. So I thought, if I can get a close enough counterexample of this theorem that is correct to more than 8 decimal points, people won't be able to disprove it, and it'll appear that I have disproven this very, very major mathematical formula. So we just put it with hovering 3D numbers in the background, and with some 4-digit number to the 12th power plus some other 4-digit number to the 12th power equals some other number to the 12th power. So anyone who happened to know this theorem from high school math or college would know that was actually impossible, but if they typed it in their calculator, it appeared to be correct. So it appeared that in The Simpsons, in a background joke, we had disproven a literally centuries-old mathematical conjecture. So that was one of the few times I really lurked on the internet. It was those discussion groups at that time of TV shows, and I was watching for the next few days, and people got it, and they were like, what the hell is going on here? It appears to be correct. This can't be. And I was so happy. Like that was second best moment of my life right there.
Yeah, exactly right.
And at the end, Homer goes into the real world. I don't know if you remember that. So they actually superimposed some graphics on a live shot, which was shot with great difficulty in Los Angeles on during the day. So another groundbreaking moment in Simpsons history.
Yeah, for sure. So after joining the Simpsons, you after a couple of years, you started developing Futurama with Simpsons creator Matt Groening. What was it about you that made Matt want to develop this project with you? Because he initially come up with the idea, correct, and then he developed it with you.
He had some of the basic ideas. He had the characters of Fry and Leela and Zap Brannigan and Mom, maybe a couple others before I came on. It was just sort of a rumor for a couple years. Matt's working on his next thing. It's going to be a sci-fi thing. And yeah, I don't know if this is the thing you're proud of or not, but there I was, but it basically boils down to I was there in a room of extreme nerds who were the Simpsons writing staff. And Matt looked around and said, "That guy looks the nerdiest. that guy's the biggest nerd of them all. He's the guy for this." So
he had snuck a theorem into a 3D episode of The Simpsons, so.
But he knew I was interested in sci-fi and had written a couple sci-fi leaning Halloween episodes. Also, I think I happened to be there at the right time where I was both had some, a few years of experience, but I wasn't running The Simpsons, so they could operate without me. So, I had certainly some luck with the time and place. Yeah, I jumped at the chance just because that's my stuff, science fiction, and cartoons. Like you get one shot like that in your life, probably.
Yeah, I mean that was initially what caught my eye about the show before it aired, because I was just like, well, I love The Simpsons, and I also love sci-fi, so I was like, oh, this is like going to hit my sweet spot even before the show premiered. So you actually spent like quite a bit of time, like several years, kind of researching and sort of developing storylines and characters, almost too much.
Yes, definitely too much. So, I mean, we were both working full-time on The Simpsons at that time. So basically, just when it was convenient, I would go hang out with Matt at his studio or go out for dinner, whatever it was. And we would, on the one hand, talk about science fiction we liked and what were the funny versions, or watch stuff. Or in some cases, he would be doodling while we were talking, and we would laugh and be like, "That's got to go in there." So it was very casual, but it went on for a long time because we'd only meet every couple weeks or whatever. And eventually, we ended up with this thick book of stuff, and we're like, "Oops, now we have too much."
Yeah,
we went in to pitch the show to the Fox network here, and they were very excited, honestly, to have any new show from Matt Groening, but we realized about like an hour in that it's like, oh, we probably should have stopped after 10 minutes. So we had stuff that didn't really even make it into the show. In fact, it was a little overthought, but whatever, it worked out. We figured it out.
Yeah. So I wondered like how much about what you kind of imagined technology would be like in the year 3000 versus the present day technologies that you wanted to lampoon. How did that kind of affect the way you built this world up? I mean, after all, someone like Bender is one of the main characters, but is also essentially a piece of technology in himself.
There's several guiding principles. I mean, the number one is basically that comedy is the top reason for doing something. So
right.
Even if that outweighs like scientific accuracy or science fiction references or whatever it is, so we got to be funny. And number two is characters have to be humans who you care about, whether they're robots or lobsters or whatever they are in the future. So those are really basic guiding principles. It has to have a human component that you understand, no matter how crazy the setting is. So that's probably number one. Actually, that's number one. I don't even remember what question I'm answering, but I'm going to answer the question whatever I want to answer instead.
Go for it.
I kind of have my take on it is that you're going to get things wrong to make it funny or so that you can tell the story you want to tell. But I like to like wink to the audience and go, we know it's wrong. Just, bear with it. And so classic examples of that being like, they have to be able to travel around the universe, but they can't go faster than the speed of light if we're going to be scientific sticklers. So we had an early episode where we said, but that's impossible. How can you get there? And the professor explains, well, we increased the speed of light in 2236 or whatever the year. So we wink to the audience and say, like, we know it's wrong, and now let's move on and enjoy the show. So it's really not that funny, to go back to funny, if everything works well. So like a very early decision was a lot of whatever technology they have will fail a lot. And
Right.
if you have hover cars, you still have traffic jams, or if you have the smelloscope, it's because the stuff you want to see is going to smell bad, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like, you can't have technology working smoothly. And Matt Groening actually, like, there's a quote, I don't know where it's from, but I often think about it, that is, with each increase in technology, there's a decrease in quality. And I think many people have noticed that to be the case. And that's also sort of a guiding principle. It's like, well, why do we need a supercomputer to, order our hamburger online or whatever?
Yeah, there is that element of like pointless technology. There's the Styropack cookie that I think that Fry has in one episode, where he has the separate parts of a cookie, the sandwich part and then the middle part, and he uses a big machine to put it all together and then separates it and licks the middle out. And it's that idea of the pointless piece of technology just to do something that you're going to take apart anyway.
You just reminded me, moment on The Simpsons. A big part of our day working these shows is ordering lunch. That's always a huge part of our day. And I remember one of the all-time great comedy writers, George Meyer, was on The Simpsons when I was there. And we ordered lunch from the Fox commissary on the Fox movie lot there. And he ordered an apple, and it came in a big like styrofoam soup bowl with a plastic lid on it. And he opened it up, took out an apple, and he went like, nature's apple. I still remember it.
Oh my God, that is funny, but also slightly depressing.
Yeah, just the beginning of the end.
Yes, exactly. Early on the show, on Futurama, you had quite a few big pioneering, I would say, 3D animated sequences, including the opening credit sequence, that were done by your animation studio, Rough Draft. You were also early adopters of all digital production, and you used some new types of sound mixing strategies. Where was the impetus for these various pushes that you had? I mean, you were the showrunner, obviously, so you obviously had a big say on this. Did you always want to push the show technologically from the beginning?
I mean, part of it is just, it's so hard to make these shows that if you notice a way to make things easier, it can really be a lifesaver. I mean, almost mean that literally, because we were going insane in the early days of Futurama. Just the amount of work in just deciding what the whole world was going to be like. It just had this extra layer of difficulty to it. The Simpsons was still being painted by hand on cells at that time. And it was just becoming possible to just skip that step and draw everything, scan it in. Again, like, it required a lot of memory and computer power to play back digitally and stuff that now is trivial, but at that time was costly. And it was one of the things, like, that's actually going to cost a little more at the start of the show. But we decided to make that investment, and so, like, the writing was on the wall at that point, and we're just going to skip doing a year of cells and then transferring everything over when it gets cheaper in 1 or 2, 3 years, whatever. So we skipped that, and so we were one of the first, at least adult animated shows to go all digital from the beginning. Other things, as far as just like the quality of life, we used to have to go to these giant sound mixing stages on the movie lot to mix the show, and they used 2-inch tape players, mechanical tape players, to hold all the tracks of sound. So if you wanted to make one, beep on the professor's console louder, you had to start up this motor and start the tape going, and you hear like clank, and a minute later we made that sound effect louder. And it's like, this is ridiculous. I've got my Mac, feel like we could do this. And yeah, sure enough, with the Mac and some specialized hardware, we were able to move the sound mix into our office, and some good speakers and stuff. I mean, it still wasn't like a home setup. It was a professional setup, and sound deadening stuff on the walls and all that stuff. But what an improvement to not have to A, drive across town, and B, wait 3 minutes to make a small adjustment. Then suddenly it's just on screen. So I do think we were one of the first TV shows to move to, local desktop computer based mixing.
Yeah. So those are all kind of, as you said, sort of things that were time saving for you. There's the 3D animated sequences, which was a big thing early on. Like, was that more of a creative, or was that something that was maybe brought along by the fact that you needed to have this big world created, and it was like, well, we can't paint everything.
That was definitely a back and forth with the animators at Rough Draft Studios. The thinking was that, for the humans, for the characters, basically, we're going to want the hand drawings to get their emotions and just the funny expressions and stuff. But for some of the cool sci-fi stuff, rockets, futuristic buildings, 3D did seem especially well suited in a way that you wouldn't necessarily need it for The Simpsons or anything. But to see a rocket, roll and turn and swoop by you is pretty cool, and it does not look as good as a flat cutout. So a lot of the discussion was, I think pretty early on we were like, we're going to do this. We have the technology. We can do this. But the actual discussion, a lot of it creatively was, can we make the 3D look bad enough that it meshes with the 2D drawings that are, mixed together in different layers on the same shot? So a lot of the work went into the shading of those 3D models to make sure that they didn't look too slick, basically. And I think they've done a very, very excellent job over the years. For viewers who are still watching the show, I hope that's many, many, many listeners who are watching the show.
Every listener. It's a requirement.
Every listener watching it multiple times. The last couple of seasons, especially the upcoming seasons, there's a little more 3D, particularly in these external shots, because Rough Draft used some of the time since we were last on to build out their model of the city and also of the interior of the Planet Express building. So we can actually do more shots now, which are these pretty cool overhead rotating shots of the city, or a camera moving through the window of the building from outside to inside, stuff like that. Again, dumbed down so you don't think about it too much. So it looks like the rest of the show, but when you see those kind of smooth rotations and high level of detail, you know that they're 3D in there. And credit to I'm trying to get everybody by name, but Scott Vanzo, our director of computer graphics, for a lot of that.
One of my favorite types of episodes on the show, I guess what I call myself personally, I call like a concept episode, where there's a core conceit at the heart of the storyline, which is always like thoroughly thought out and sometimes even backed up by maths or science. I'm thinking the brain swapping episode where they actually needed to create a mathematical problem to get everyone back into the right order. I wonder how you and the writers approach a story like that, because you can't obviously just have it all science and no character, because you've always got to have a strong story and character. Yet the science in these episodes often works out and is often very sound. Like, how do you approach those types of episodes?
The one you mentioned with the brain switching is particularly interesting. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. That was in our last run a few years back. Ken Keeler, the writer I mentioned earlier, was working on this episode, and the idea was we talk about it as a group before one person goes out and writes the first draft, and then we write it again. So we're at the very early stage where we're just talking out the story. And we wanted to do, it's a pretty straightforward cartoon idea that's been in many cartoons of characters going to switch brains. They'll have their same body, but they'll talk in the voice of the other character's brain they have. And we thought, but we don't want to just do that. We want to sci-fi it up somehow. And we're like, well, what if you switch brains with somebody, you couldn't switch back with that person? Maybe that's an interesting complication. So you'd have to trade through a series of other people to get your own brain back. And so they have this machine that can't work both ways on the same pair of people, in other words, that will switch your brains. So we're talking about that, and we get to the end of the day, and we're like, yeah, that seems pretty interesting. And then we're like, but wait a second, is it mathematically certain that you'll be able, everybody will be able to get their own brain back, or will there always be some brain stranded in another body? Not sure. So we went, we were like, okay, well, let's pick it up tomorrow. We went home, come in the next day, we're getting started, and Ken Keeler clears his throat. I think he actually stood up at a whiteboard, which we had in the room. He said, "I have a theorem." And he proceeded to prove a mathematical theorem, which is if you initially scramble people's brains, mix them up, switching. If you bring in two people who still have their original brains, then using them, you can get everyone's brain, including theirs, back to its original position. So that's the English version of his theorem that he had proven in the mathematical field of group theory. So I'm like, this is fantastic. A theory. They're going to have to ask this question in the episode, and we're going to make that proof the hero of the episode. So this is just very exciting because no cartoon has ever done this. But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, our concerns are these have to be things viewers care about, humanity. Yeah. So like, we're going to do it, but we're not going to, you don't have to understand it. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But what we ended up doing is they're wondering if it's possible. And then we cut to this, hovering chalkboard with the proof for 1 second at the climax of the episode. Big musical, dun, 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 triumphant music. And you see the whole proof for 1 second. And it's like, okay, done. They proved it. People who are interested can then go back and freeze frame that moment and go, oh my God, this is an actual mathematical proof. So I've always been super proud of that. I think we got away with it. They kept the story interesting. They proved it, but it didn't take time away from people who weren't interested in it, but it was all there in, high res detail if you wanted to look at the proof.
So things like this and these sort of maybe slightly complex science fiction ideas, how often do they come first before the core story and the character storyline and arcs come? I mean, I'm sure there's lots of stories where it's character first. It's like, okay, this is a Fry and Leela episode, and then it comes along. But is it often the other way around?
There's no fixed way. It's a very mysterious process how to come up with a decent story. I'm not saying we succeed all the time, but there's multiple approaches. One is kind of character-based, like you're saying, like, we haven't really done a big conflict between Dr. Zoidberg and Leela, or say, for example, which is going to be an episode this year. And then ended up with this like fantastic sci-fi story that actually is built around that conflict, and it really came together just beautifully. And but many of them don't. And I'm the same. Then we just don't do the episode, hopefully, but we try. But so that's a type of starting point where we're like, it's very character based from the start. A different sort of episode, and there are quite a few that are technology based, are especially common when we come back after a long cancellation and new things have been invented in the real world. So, for example, when we most recently came back, it was on streaming TV, which didn't really exist the last time we were canceled. So our very first episode back was about streaming TV in the future and wiring your brain directly into the TV so you could binge watch thousands of episodes, and the danger of that where you'll die if the episodes run out and stuff like that. So that one was, well, let's do something about streaming TV, and then what's a way of pushing that to the sci-fi extreme? Well, wire it into Fry's brain, and it's life and death. Whether if the series runs out, he dies. And so you can see how that was sort of generated from starting from the technology angle. So definitely both directions.
And of course, one of the most famous ones that you did involving a parody of modern day tech was the iPhone, the iPhone, which produced one of probably the most popular memes on the internet of Fry shouting, "Shut up and take my money," and producing some money, which is occasionally I'll go to search a GIF on an app, and you'll get your suggested GIFs, which are just like the most popular ones at the moment. And it's interesting how frequently Fry is up there and amongst the top 10 most frequent ones.
Yeah, like that's one of the only points I will say when we were writing the show, and I don't even remember where it came from, if it was Patrick Verone who wrote that episode or somebody in the room, but shut up and take my money. And it's one of the few times something ended up being a meme where right instantaneously I was like, that's good. People are going to use that. Like it was it was just such a concise description of the Apple Corporation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm a big Apple fan and user, by the way, so I say it with love. But and the idea of the iPhone being implanted in your eye, there sort of was a runner in the early Futurama that phones were getting smaller and smaller because those were sort of in the flip phone days, and in the late 90s, early 2000s, people had phones that were like this big. There was called like the cigarette lighter Nokia phone, for example, and so that was sort of the joke early on, was Amy had such a tiny phone that she ate it, she swallowed it by accident, I think.
And then the charger was ginormous as well,
Right.
wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. So, and then, started to get headsets and stuff. So we moved to the implantable iPhone, which I still think is pretty good and, reasonably ahead of where we are in real life. But I think, we're going to go there eventually. Like that seems like the ultimate evolution of all hardware is for the hardware to disappear. And it's everything becomes abstract. Like, the way you move from like videotape to DVD to streaming, like there's no medium anymore or whatever. And, I don't know what the iPhone, but you could imagine the ultimate thing will be it's part of our cyborg body someday. And you're just think about somebody and you're talking to them or whatever.
so it's time for your next pick, which is the last piece of tech that you've been interested in. What have you got?
The thing which, I find fascinating is these driverless cars, which are now swarming around Los Angeles, Waymo, owned by the Google Corporation, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't miss them. They're these big white SUVs with a lot of LiDAR contraptions strapped on the roof and cameras on all the corners and stuff like that. But is not experimental. I mean, there might be, hundreds of these, I assume at this point, traveling around LA all the time. You can book them on your phone and take them like Uber or Lyft or the other car services. And it's pretty good. I've taken it quite a few times now, just because I find it so interesting. But it's not perfect. I think if you take a human driver, I think you have about, if you get like the top maybe 10 percentile of human driver, I think is better than the Waymo still. But there's a couple weird situations with the Waymo that it still does not know how to deal with, which have been slightly, I wouldn't say, scary is not quite the right word, but you just mystifying. So the biggest example being, I went to a basketball game with my daughter and got downtown to see the Lakers, and the traffic was insane because it was a basketball game, and people were trying to park and trying to drop people off, and you couldn't get anywhere near the stadium where we had set the drop-off point. And a human would have just said, I'm going to go over there and let you off, and you can walk 2 blocks, whatever it is. But the Waymo was very determined to get through, and it just got itself into this complete gridlock where it was not next to a curb where we could get out or anything. And while we're waiting there, this very large group of I don't know if this is a phenomenon you have there, but of sort of street bicyclists came by in the other direction who are just there to cause trouble and weave around cars that are stuck and stuff like that. This is actually a phenomenon in LA. I mean, like 100 people or more.
Oh, wow.
And, so they all came by, and they're all riding by against traffic between lanes, and they're all hitting the Waymo as they go by. It's because they think there's no repercussions because there's no drivers. They're all just like slapping the windows as they go by. I'm sitting with my daughter, and I wasn't really scared because it appeared that they were, I could kind of see they're just singling out the Waymo because it's pointless. But there's a screen back there, and it said like, the text lit up on the screen and said, "We are aware of your situation."
Oh, God.
Oh, that's very reassuring. Anyway, it eventually pulled over. There's been other weird things where it waited like, 20 minutes to turn left across 3 lanes of traffic in a way where a human would never do it. It would go around the block and make 3 right turns or whatever. But generally, I have to say I'm a big fan because, if you get the best human driver, it's better. But if you get, the lower half of human drivers in driving quality, that's way worse. And it's become such a gamble. You don't know if the driver's crazy, the car is falling apart. I don't know.
True.
So I hate the idea of AI taking over my profession, but everyone's a little more open-minded about other professions, and it's like it's 10 times safer supposedly according to insurance records than human drivers so far and stuff. So if you pick my thinking on it is I like it, but only go to places which are not experiencing any unusual conditions,
Right.
crowds, whatever. So that's
Yeah.
my current take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I find the pick like absolutely fascinating because it's one of those technologies that I think we hear a lot about, but it's so difficult to actually use it. It's like you say that the Waymers are more or less, I think, only in LA and maybe like I think maybe San Francisco as well. But like,
San Francisco, yeah.
yeah, so not many places. But you still hear a lot about it. I find it interesting because I think the idea of that. I'm not sure if I would feel safe. Like, I'm not sure if I would feel confident getting into it, but it seems like you are. Do you just turn off when you get in?
I was nervous the first couple times. It's one of those things. I think, like almost everything in life, the 10th time you do it, you're you no longer think about it. You're no longer worried about it. It's kind of like public speaking or almost anything. It's like you can only be nervous about something about 10 times. And there are some reassuring things, like on the screen while you're watching it, it shows you a little graphical representation of your surroundings, and you can see every car, you can see every person, and they're highlighted in different ways. You can see the other Waymo, so you go like, it really knows what everything is that is around it and which way they're going. So it's fairly reassuring to see the level of detail of even just what they're showing you graphically. Anyway, it works. I mean, that's all I can say is it works. So, and then you say like, well, it's AI. Like, what's the guarantee that there's not going to be an odd situation that the AI fails on and it crashes? And that is absolutely true. And I do worry about it, but that's being a human driver, so odd things
Mm.
happen, and some, there's a wheel falls off and you swerve, and it's just, I don't know. It's not gonna reach perfection, but if it's 10 times safer than a human, I certainly feel better getting in there with my kid.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you're getting in with your kid. Did you see this now as the future of transport?
Yes, it's hard to believe it wouldn't be. I mean, it's again, it's like, I do feel bad. We have a huge number of people make a living driving in LA. It's a driving city, but everything used to be a horse and buggy city, and it moved on. So hopefully there will be other other
Yeah.
things that people can do while riding around. But if it's saving, it's such a dangerous thing, and traffic is really ruinous in Los Angeles. So if it can get cars off the road and be safer, I think we're going to have to adjust somehow. And I'm sure someone else is saying, like, if we can get AI to write cartoons and animate them and do the voices, that will really save the animation industry as well. So
Yeah.
I'm aware of the irony of being terrified of that and of looking forward to it improving another industry.
Yeah. I guess that's a good place to maybe ask your thoughts on AI and how it affects you. What's your kind of view on it from where you sit as someone who is a showrunner, someone who is a writer? Are you worried about it? And do you feel that the conditions that the Writers Guild carved out, do you think they are going to protect you?
I am very worried about it. I think the writers have a little longer survival period ahead of us than some other professions that are involved in making our show, for example, and a lot of Hollywood stuff. I just to emphasize the speed at which this is going. If you go back, maybe 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever, I went to a Writers Guild meeting here in LA, just a big, gigantic meeting, hundreds of people, 1,000 people, whatever, where they were just talking about the contracts are going to run out soon. What are some issues that we should be looking for in the new contract? And so, of course, from my point of view, it's like, well, better rerun payments for streaming TV, which are much lower than it used to be for broadcast TV. That kind of
Mm.
standard kind of TV contract stuff. And then after the like 20th person came up to make a suggestion from the audience, someone said, "What are we going to do in terms of AI protections?" And I almost laughed because it wasn't on my radar at all. It didn't.
Yeah.
This is 3 years ago, whatever. It's like, is that a joke or not? And then there was the people, the board members at that time had considered it and started giving a well thought out answer. And I was like, oh my God, I literally cannot believe I lived to see that question asked sincerely. I
Mm.
really didn't think yeah, starting as someone who was planning to study it, I didn't think in my lifetime, I would see the kind of stuff we're seeing now. And probably one of the reasons I didn't pursue that ultimately is I thought like I will be a stepping stone in a multi-generational, push. I really did not think I would live to see the stuff we're seeing, not especially as not even that old of a person, I would like to think. So it was really the acceleration in the last few years, just stunning. So writers at the moment, I will say like, at least Disney and the people we deal directly with, there is no pressure on us, just to be clear, to use AI, even though it might be cheaper theoretically. I think there's a lot of nervousness as far as using it for writing, particularly writing in voices because of the unknown legal issues. And studios are very nervous about lawsuits and, someone could say like your model trained on this and I actually wrote that script and your AI stole it or that kind of stuff, So it's a legal quagmire for sure, which is helpful in terms of delaying its impact on the profession. So writing wise, the Writers Guild deal, I think does allow some limited use if both the studio, the bot who's paying and the writer who's working both agree to use it. Like I think both sides have to agree. And then in that case, the writer can sort of use it for inspiration, but the credit will always go to a human. That's sort of the deal that was arranged right now. So it can be used. I haven't seen anything great as far as comedy that's been written by it, but I haven't looked a lot. So I think comedy may also have a little bit of an edge, although you could certainly imagine using it to generate story ideas or that kind of thing. Now, that said, there's a certain point where you start to like, has the human race been defeated by itself in a way? And you go like, do we want AI to write the stories, or is that a basic part of being human that we can be creative and make stuff up? And so there's this idea is interesting to me that we could make a decision as a species and say this is something we want to keep doing, whether it's driving cars or whether it is making up stories and writing and making music and stuff like that, things that AI is good at. I mean, we could say like, no, AI could do that, but we're not going to. We're going to make a decision. Unfortunately, our species just can't. They cannot make group species level decisions. So I don't believe any of that's going to happen. I mean, at some point, it's this philosophical thing in almost any area of life where it's like AI could do that, but we want to keep doing that. Are we going to have that option? I don't know. So I think writers are safe for a while. There's immediate threat now, I think, to voice actors, where you could have one person, for example, read the part and change the voice to someone else's voice, to an existing voice, perhaps of an actor who's passed away or someone who is asking for a lot more money. Again, I think you have legal issues which are getting in the way of that, and hopefully will continue to, where you say like you can't use that person's voice that's been established without their permission. The AI can't copy it. But that's that's now. That's not the future anymore. And also a lot of animation jobs. There's a lot of discussion of storyboarding, where you say like just lay out the basic settings for this conversation. And I've talked to artists who say like they get stuff that's not very good in their opinion, but it seems to be much further along than writing, for example. So there's also other unbelievable stuff, which I'm sure a lot of people have seen, where you take like a 2D drawing and there's AI systems now which can make a 3D model by just making a reasonable guess at what the other sides of the scribble you made look like, and they're quite good. So you could say like, okay, 3D modeling, someone can just doodle it and then the AI produces the 3D model. So there's a lot of animation related careers which are in imminent threat, face imminent threats as well, again with the possible philosophical decision that humans want to keep doing this as art.
My personal belief when it comes to, I think, especially comedy, is that I cannot conceive of a time when AI can write comedy. I just, as someone who watches and just takes in a lot of comedy, I just don't see how original comedy, good comedy, can be created by these AIs. Whereas something like animation, I can see it might not be quite as good, but like it might be serviceable for some people.
That seems like a pretty reasonable Turing test is if the computer can write a comedy script that you find funny, moving, funny, maybe that's a reasonable definition of full intelligence, full artificial intelligence,
I
general
guess
intelligence.
so, yeah. Yeah, well.
By the way, let me also say philosophically that these questions about what roles in Hollywood are going to be replaced by AI, invariably I start going, you know what, though? We're focused on this tiny pixel in the in the whole world, and it's like, who knows what entertainment's going to look like? The scale of change to society based on AI, with reality being called into question, and there's no such thing as a documentary fact anymore of anything. Like, the scale of change to society may be so great as to make all of these concerns trivial about, will my job survive, or I don't know what's going to happen to the earth, to human civilization. Literally, it's a civilization scale thing. So it's hard and perhaps too overwhelming to focus on things beyond your own area of interest. But yeah, who knows? I think the things we're not seeing are going to get us down the road.
Yeah. I'm going to take a hard right off this conversation.
Okay. Yeah, I was getting a bit grim there. Let's move it back to something fun.
So there are many robots and pieces of technology on Futurama, more than you can probably keep track of.
Yes.
But do you have any particular favorites that were written especially for the show? Any robots or pieces of tech?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the robots have very specific purposes. So just to give, for example, there's a robot called Hedonism Bot, and you're like, why was he built? Someone built this robot to enjoy and experience hedonism, and that's its function in life. So there are a lot of very specific functions, and that's often what makes them entertaining. I really am a big fan of Roberto, the murderous knife wielding robot who. Just like, that's the ultimate question of, why did they build that guy?
Yes, exactly.
He's always constantly threatening your life with his knives, and apparently he was built to do that. So I love him. And Dave Herman, the actor who plays him, he does this incredible, like, ha-ha! Attack noise with the knives. So a lot of these characters appear, and we throw them in for a single joke in the script, and that's surely the case with Roberto, the murderous robot. But sometimes our actors just give us a performance out of nothing that is so funny that they turn it into a recurring character. And that's certainly the case there. David Herman turned that guy into someone you wanted to see again and again. And yeah, so he's going to be around plenty in the coming couple of years.
Well, I really like the kind of the ones that are almost like one task jobs, but they're just a really silly one. There's the hair robot, the one who delivers the hair.
Oh, hair robot, yes. Yeah, when your hair gets burned off in a lab accident or whatever, it comes with a few options. Yeah, that's a favorite. There's coffee enema bot, I think, is very specialized. Coffee enema bot.
Yeah, coffee enema
Too
bot.
Specialized.
Yeah, and acting bot, which I just love that's just acting, just acts. It's kind of like it's a very specific job, but yet it's also kind of not specific.
All encompassing, yeah. Acting unit 3.0, whatever in the credits, yeah. And it was directed by directing unit something or other.
Exactly. And I guess we should talk about the heads in the jar, which is how you often get celebrities on the show, or people who have old presidents and so forth. How did that idea come about? Is that inspired by any sci-fi story?
Well, The Simpsons has a long tradition of guest stars, first of all, and we're going to want to have guest stars in the show, but our show is set 1,000 years in the future. So, yeah, certainly we had to turn to sci-fi tradition for some excuse. So head in the jar in the lab seemed like a reasonable way to go sci-fi-wise. So my explanation is that there's the fluid that the head is sitting in addition to keeping them alive, it keeps them alive and with the appearance of when they were most well known. So it kind of holds their appearance locked in at that period. So because a lot of our guest stars look better in the jar than in real life now.
Yes.
So it's been a reasonably good excuse. Occasionally they come, they can be on as a robot or as the 50 generation descendant of themselves, which we've done all of the excuses, but head in a jar is the tried and true way.
What was your favorite moment from the new season that you written as a favorite plot or character arc?
There's we have a huge, I will say for this show, we have our most mathematical episode ever coming this season. And I say that having already discussed an episode where the climax was a mathematical theorem. So bearing that in mind, we have our most mathematical episode coming up this year, where the origin of it was Matt Groening had seen this old Disney cartoon, Donald in Magic Land, where Donald Duck walks through this land of numbers. And so we all watched it, and there's very little math in there, and there's a lot of like, Donald, did you know math is important in music? Really? And then let's watch this orchestra play for 10 minutes. So it's stuff which kind of cuts past the math and after waving it. So Matt Groening was like, can you nerds do the good version of that?
Right.
That actually, by good, I mean, the part that actually covers some math. So we have our crew entering this abstract land that is inhabited by numbers, and also to tie it into the 3D, there's a lot of super cool 3D graphics in that to sort of illustrate the numerical stuff that's going on. So that's the 4th episode, I think.
Right.
It's called the Numberland Gap, and so that is a super nerd highlight. For me personally, one other, just shooting in a different direction, I got to meet Victor Wembanyama, the tallest basketball player in the NBA, because he makes a guest appearance in our first one, and that was very exciting for me and super surreal.
Yeah, I enjoyed your announcement of his appearance at Comic-Con, where there was obviously not many basketball fans there.
Yes. Yeah, I made this announcement. They're like, "Who? What? NBA? What's a sports? What's a sport?"
Sports.
Yeah, it wasn't the right crowd for it, but
Yes.
this might not be there. And I'm not necessarily either, but I do follow him just because he seems like he seems like a really smart, funny, interesting guy personally.
Yeah, great. So before we go into your last pick, what would you say is Futurama's overall message about technology and I guess the people who use it and the humans who use it?
It's pretty basic, but the message is that the technology changes, what planet you're on changes, but the things that make us human that we care about don't really change. So that's very much the message of the show, is that you could have the most incredible technology that could rocket you across the universe. You can have galaxies exploding, but when you watch the show, what you care about is Fry's mom died. It's the most basic human emotions are actually what we care about, and these other things are fascinating. They completely change our daily lives, but that there's these kind of through line through human evolution, that there's just basic things that make us human that aren't going to change. So that's sort of that's the unchanging part of the world, I think.
Yeah. I think it just goes to show as well that when people talk about their favorite Futurama moments, it's always the one where the dog died, or it's the emotional flashback with Fry and his brother. It's always a human moments that people talk about.
Right, and we've tried to embrace that, and we don't do it every episode, but at least once or twice a season, try to go for something genuinely touching, which, as I always say, was not clear at the beginning of the show that was an option. It's a crazy sci-fi show, but sticking to Matt's philosophy and just saying, like, the show is about the characters and the other stuff is the setting, it's the comedy, but the thing you latch onto as a human is what these characters care about, and if they care about it, you care about it, and that proved to be true, beyond what we initially intended, and that so has allowed us to go for these more oddball, very emotional episodes set in the craziest setting, and they still play because people are able to have that connection with the character no matter how kooky the setting may be.
We'll be back in just a minute to find out David's everything pick. But this is the part of the show where we take a look into the past to discuss a piece of technology that you may not have heard of. Weird, ahead of its time, an abject failure or success. Whatever it was certainly something. Before its takeover by Elon Musk and the change to X, Twitter was the service that many of us would check multiple times a day. It was where we made friends, discussed whatever we wanted, and all had a great time. Well, in theory. So what about a dedicated Twitter device? That was the idea behind the Twitter Peak, released in 2009. Peak was a company that released their first product, also named Peak, in 2008. It was an email-only device that featured a QWERTY keyboard and literally no other features. A year after the release of the first iPhone, this device was aimed at people who wanted email on the go but didn't want to be overwhelmed with all the other types of communication that were becoming increasingly prevalent. As David Pogue, writing for the New York Times, put it, "Non-techies, this one's for you." But Peak couldn't resist the newest, hottest form of communication when, in 2009, a mere 3 years after the birth of Twitter, Peak released the Twitter Peak. Measuring 4 by 2.7 inches and coloured in Twitter's turquoise hue, it featured a QWERTY keyboard and a 2.5-inch display. It was pretty cute. Unfortunately, that's where the adoration ended. The device cost $99, and that only included 6 months of cell service. You'd be forced to cough up almost $8 a month after that. And the problems didn't end there. The Twitter timeline resembled an email inbox, compressing each tweet into its first 3 or 4 words. To read a full tweet, you had to press the return key, whereupon you could look through the complete messages, but only one at a time. Even worse, the Twitter Peak buzzed and emitted a tweet every time a new tweet arrived. Not a tweet to you, just a tweet in your timeline. This was back in the quieter days of Twitter, but that was still all too frequent. The iPhone 3G had already been released a year prior in 2008, as had the excellent Tweety app for iPhone OS. And while BlackBerry didn't receive a dedicated Twitter app until 2010, you could still access the Twitter website through the device. That left people who didn't have a smartphone still wanted access to Twitter on the go and were willing to pay $8 a month for the privilege. That wasn't many, and although it was only discontinued in 2012, the Twitter Peak quickly faded from public view. While it was a failure, the idea of minimal devices that eschew the flashy, do-everything approach of an iPhone or Pixel lives on today with devices such as the Minimal Phone and the Light Phone. So, was it just ahead of its time? No. No, it wasn't. So we are now on to your last pick, which is your everything pick. This is the piece of tech that has meant everything to you, and you've alluded to it a bit already, but what is that?
That would be the Apple II computer, which we did mention briefly before, but that's what made me aware that I loved computer science and technology internally. It was the first thing in my life that I could sit down at the computer and start programming once I learned to do that, and days would go by and I wouldn't realize that time was passing. It's that there was some kind of innate connection between me and that machine, and I don't know if that's really possible in today's world if people get a laptop or whatever in today's world, but at that time, A, it was new, B, I was the right age, but C, it was a much simpler device, and you could take the top off and look like, oh, that's a memory chip, that's the processor. So I would personally give credit to Steve Wozniak for his reference manual that came with the computer, and in addition to, there was like a basic programming manual, but there was this much more hardcore reference manual which had all of the operating system code and assembly language, and you knew where what bit, a certain pixel on the screen was stored in, and you could learn everything. You could really be intimately familiar with that machine. So that book really made me a computer person. And I will say with pride, I have a master's in computer science. I never at any level took a computer programming class in my life. I learned how to program from those books. And then I learned how to program BASIC, learned how to program in 6502 assembly language. And then, I would just take classes and be like, well, for this AI class, you have to program in Lisp. But it didn't seem, once you get the basic idea, you're like, I'm not going to take a programming course to learn Lisp. But, they're all somewhat related. So you just like learn it as you go for the different languages. So I somehow made it through, all based on those original Wozniak manuals for my programming. But, yeah, and there were no, just to again to say like the difference in time, like me, I had a couple friends, David Borden, David Sheminovich. We were three Davids, all on the math team as well, by the way. You'd be shocked to hear. And we built a few things together. We wrote a compiler. We didn't know what a compiler was even really. We had never, we didn't read any books about it. We're like, we know they exist, and we wanted to do faster graphics, which was hard to do on the Apple II. But my friend David Borden was writing what we wanted to be this 3D graphics, minimal options to rotate objects and make wireframe. Where do you get reference for that? Like, not in our town in New Jersey. We actually had to take the bus into New York City to the public library to find a book about the perspective, to find the equations to use. So you could not go on the internet. Like, so to get the equations to rotate a cube, we had to take a bus ride to the library in New York City. Like that was a very different type. Anyway, but that, we cared about it enough that we did things like that. So, but I felt, love toward that machine, I would say.
Yeah. And so you mentioned earlier on, was this something that your dad bought, and that's how you got access to it?
Yes. So he got the Pong game. Then I remember we went to a couple early home computer shows. There was a couple competitors, the TRS-80, the Tandy computer, and there were a couple slightly higher end ones. There might have been IBM out at that time. We knew so little that I remember we would go around and be like, oh, look, this one has Hires Graphics, Hires Graphics, H-I-R-E-S, Hires Graphics. So we were at home saying, yeah, we saw one that had Hires Graphics. And then a while later, oh, high res graphics. So it's like, everything was new. So my dad jumped in early, got the Apple II. But, largely because he wanted it, but I started occupying it at all hours of the day. By the way, I wrote several different video games. I wrote one called Zoid, which I tried to get published. So it was inspired by Quicks, the game I loved shortly before this time or during this time. It was a kind of abstract game where you're drawing lines, and there were balls bouncing around in my version, and some were dangerous. You had to trap the balls in little areas of lines. So it was a pretty good game, by the standards of that year. I thought it was fully professional. I sent it to this company, Broderbund Software, to see if they had any interest in it. And I got back a form letter that's like, Dear Mr. Cohen, misspelling my name. And I was like, that's a bad sign when the first word is misspelled of your name.
Start.
So, they were not interested. And for good reason, which is that the whole Apple II was outdated already by the time I was writing my stuff, and they, probably sales were dropping. It was all I could think about. If I was anywhere boring, class, whatever, and I just didn't want to participate in reality, I would be spending all my time thinking about my game or other programs I was writing or whatever. It was so I wasn't staring at a screen, but my internal screen sort of about that stuff. It was hypnotic. One more awesome thing about the Apple II I remember just popped into my head again, just about how open it was and how you understood everything. It wasn't like layer upon layer of software and existing subroutines. When we bought it, it had only capital letters. You could only type in capital letters at the time we bought it. And then we saw this upgrade kit where you could get lowercase letters. And this is how you did it. You had to go into the computer and pry out a chip and replace it because it had the shapes, the bitmaps of the lowercase letters in it. And then you had to run a little alligator clip from under the shift key to one pin of that
Oh my God.
chip, which would, put a 1 or a 0 to tell whether the shift key was down. So that's how we got lowercase letters on
Oh,
our
wow.
Apple II computer.
That's crazy.
That just popped into my mind.
Yeah, I never realized that. So as well as like programming, what else did you do on the Apple II? Was any like...
I played games, and we bought some, but also there was, I think the statute of limitations has elapsed. There was a lot. Everybody at a computer was trading floppy disks of games at that time, which someone had managed to copy somehow. So yeah, we had a big stack of games, and that's part of also was very inspirational to me, those games, because I knew intimately how unpowerful the Apple II was, and to see these games people managed to, the performance people managed to squeeze out of the system. You had to write software in assembly language to get that performance, so those
Right.
games basically inspired me to look at that Wozniak book and learn assembly language, and that was the only way, because any further layers and you couldn't have steady motion even of 2D stuff. So it was hardcore.
Yeah. Well, David, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. But before we go, I like to finish the show on a positive note and ask my guests if there's something in tech that's giving you hope or making you happy these days and giving you maybe some hope for the future. Is there anything that you've got your eye on or that you're enjoying at the minute?
Hope-wise, I love stories I'm starting to see about AI medical advances. I think that's a fantastic use of AI, and like some drugs that have been built, atom by atom by AI to achieve the result desired. So that's like, I would have said a very, very long-term hope, which now seems like a short-term hope, and maybe can improve, our lives and let us make it a little further into the future. As far as things I'm enjoying, well, I already talked about Waymo, and I do enjoy that. I guess just being able to be, this is not novel in any way and not even recent, but just the idea that I can be in touch with my good friends in a way that, in the beginning of my life, like if you left high school, left college, there were a lot of people that you never saw again. And just to, like, now my daughter is off away from home, but I can be in touch with her and can see her and stuff like that. So just the idea that you can now work and hang out with people who are thousands of miles away, such as yourself. That's been a plus to my life, I think.
Yeah. Well, David, you're a fine meatbag. Thank you for joining me.
The ultimate compliment.
Thank you so much, David.
It's a pleasure, and thank you. I've known you for a long time, for anyone who's not listening too. So it's very nice to still be in touch with you as a prime example of what I was just saying. So,
take care.
So long, everybody.
And that's it for First Last Everything. Thanks again to David for joining me, and make sure you check out the latest 13th season of Futurama on Hulu and Disney+. You can find links to everything we discussed in the show notes, where you'll also find links to find me online, as well as a link to our feedback form. Thanks for all the nice feedback on the show so far, especially on the individual chapter art. If you haven't noticed them, check out your podcast player's album art during a guest's pick for a version of the item drawn in a pixel art style by yours truly. This is a Mac Stories podcast. Head to macstories.net/podcast to check out all the other shows. Thanks to the amazing Will Laporte, who does our music, and of course thanks to you for listening. I'll see you next time, when my guest will be Esther Hubricks, co-founder of the award-winning children's app PopBock. I hope you'll join me.